Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to Veeam's Industry Insights. My name is Jeff Reichard on Veeam's strategy team, and I have the immense pleasure to be joined today by Dave Russell and Jason Buffington, also frequent presences here on Veeam Industry Insights. This is actually kind of a special show for us, team, because as you know, this is a project that you gentlemen began sort of back in the COVID era. And we are now at show, and I counted this up, number 209. So pretty incredible job that we've had 209 episodes of Industry Insights, and we're closing the year out strong with this episode. Now, as most of you who have tuned in to Industry Insights know, we want this to be interactive. So please, whatever platform you are viewing from today, take a minute and in the chat or in the Q&A section of that platform, let us know where you are tuning in from. We will have the map feature that we usually use. I'll take a couple of breaks during the course of today's show, and we will look at where we have people joining us from. But again, it's going to be a great day. It's the final Industry Insights of 2024 with Dave Russell and Jason Buffington. And we have a great set of content for you today because we're going to talk about two industry analyst themes with these two distinguished former industry analysts. The first topic we're going to talk about, and Dave is going to take the lead on that, is the recently released Forrester Wave. The second topic that we're going to talk about is last week's Gartner IOCS conference in Las Vegas, Nevada. And my colleague Jason was there, where he both attended lots of sessions and presented a session on threats facing organizations in 2025. So Dave, let's jump in. Let's get right to it. Walk us through the Forrester Wave Industry Analyst Report.
Yeah, so, much like some of the other evaluations in the market, here, this Forrester methodology called a Wave is focused on a specific market. The data resilience solutions market is how they define it. We'll kind of break down how this has evolved as methodologies generally do. But just a couple of weeks ago, this was published. We're very happy about it at Veeam in terms of not only Veeam's placement, which we can decompose, but we've always said, Jason, for the 4.5+ years that we've been running Industry Insights, hey, you owe it to yourself to get educated. If you're an end user, if you're an administrator, or any role that you may have in the data center, this is but one of the many great ways to see what's going on in the market.
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that, every analyst firm seems to have its own lens, right? There's one firm that looks at market share and economics. There's one that looks at execution. I like how the Forrester Wave looks at strategy. Certainly, it's also gratifying that we're furthest to the right on that. I love that we're seeing the leaders quadrant there. But yeah, you owe it to yourself to look at the lenses on which other firms are looking at Veeam and the little folks that want to be Veeam. And I think this is a fair readout this year.
Excellent. So that's a perfect topic change. Dave, talk us through the methodology that Forrester uses specifically.
One thing that I think is very, very unique about Forrester is their flagship methodology, the Wave. They actually publish their individual scoring or criteria for each of the axes. And you can see on the x-axis, it's strength of strategy, like Veeam was mentioned and Jason attributed to us moving over further to the right. And then there's strength of offering. And within the report itself, they actually talk through the individual criteria, each vendor's assessment, and then of course they define in the document what each of those areas actually mean, meaning they have paragraphs on all of them. But the interesting thing on the Wave, very, very transparent. Another Gartner methodology or a different methodology is the Gartner Critical Capabilities. That's one of the few that Gartner has that does something similar, where you can actually see the scoring in a Magic Quadrant, for instance. You don't see the scoring. If you're a Gartner client, you have the ability to move around sliders of higher or lower importance for the individual criteria in each of the X and Y axes, but you don't know exactly what the analysts may have put in to their mixer and their evaluation. Here you can see exactly what it is. So if you wanted, you could open up the report. You could go look for a sub-item that was of particular interest to you, and then you could look across all of the vendors. It's a nice level of transparency.
Well, that's a great lead-in. So, gentlemen, why did Veeam turn out as well as we did in this year's MQ? What can you, or I'm sorry, in this year's Forrester Wave, what can you call out that Forrester mentioned that put us where we are in terms of strength of strategy and in the leader's ring?
Yeah, so if we think about that x-axis, strength of strategy, there were, I just want to make sure because I'm looking at the individual readouts itself, and of the 9 vendors they evaluated, there were 2 vendors that got high scores. It's on a technically could be 0, but typically a 1 to 5.0 scale. And there were 2 vendors that got 3 5s out of the criteria. Veeam was one of them, where Veeam scored high and highest, but where we scored on our evaluation was on innovation, on our roadmap for the future, as well as our partner ecosystem. And if we just pause on that, Jason, and of course, Jeff, I don't think that's a surprise to us, meaning in the last few years, speaking of COVID years, it really was 2020 when Veeam turned up the amplitude on release cadence. And we've been operating under issuing new releases of Veeam Data Platform ever since, great frequency, updates, new functionality, etc. So that innovation notion is nice to see get recognized. The roadmap, though, we've also got a plan to continue to do that, not just throughout this year, because when this published, version 12.3 of Veeam Data Platform wasn't generally available yet, but it was just on the eve of being released. And we had pre-shared our 2025 plans. And then, Jason, our partner ecosystem, I know that's an area you know well. We like to think that Veeam always goes to market with partners, through partners, and we've got a strong play there.
Yeah, and I think that there's probably some correlation. I don't know if it's mathematical, but let's call it anecdotal at least, the fact that we're recognized as a customer favorite. And I think one of the reasons why is because we have stayed committed to the partner ecosystem. Let's be honest, in 2024, or even all the way back through the last couple of years that you've mentioned, the stuff that we're dealing with today is hard. Right? Cyber resiliency is hard. Business continuity is hard. Regulatory compliance is hard. And if you're the only one in the room who's trying to figure this stuff out, it's going to be a challenge. And so I love the fact that we've always unapologetically said, you need to get other smart folks in the room to help you be successful. And I think that's probably giving those customers, Veeam's customers, a better outcome because of the breadth and diversity of the partners they can enlist for that. And I'm going to give the partners the credit for why we are that customer favorite, because we're in this together to ensure our shared customer success. And I think the customers get that, and evidently Forrest is hearing that. That's why our little ring has literally a halo around it, based on that customer feedback. Jeff, can I get an amen?
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I will say I have a lot of cybersecurity conversations with both partners and with customers I talk to. one thing that I hear both from partners about the customers they're working with and from end user organizations themselves, everyone is struggling to fill the ranks of security professionals they need. And on the cyber side in particular, that's why good partnerships are so critical for folks, because they make your bench deeper. And there's not many end user organizations that don't need a deeper bench when it comes to the cyber side. Okay, we're going to take our first quick break because we have ready for you a map update. And if we could go ahead and share the map. Excellent. Right now, we have dialed in from North and Central America. We have California, Florida, Michigan, Colorado, and we also have some Midwesterners. So thank you very much joining in Michigan. And who do we have under that? I should know. Sorry about that.
Great state.
And Ohio. And Texas, I forgot Texas. That's bad. Okay, so we've got Florida, Texas. Good representation today. I, of course, am in Connecticut. We also have in Europe, if you take a look, we have Italy and Portugal tuned in, and I love Sardinia lit up there off the coast of Italy too. We have colleagues from Sardinia. If we go down to Africa, we have Nigeria. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed Brazil in Latin America. So we've got Brazil.
They're like Texas. We're meat
down
eaters,
in South America. That's exactly right. We'll hop over, and we've got Nigeria in Africa. So thank you very much from all the folks that we've got tuned in. If you have not put your location in the chat yet, please go ahead and do that. Now, we've been talking so far, gents, about this year's Forrester Wave. Let's change focus just a little bit, because obviously if there's this year's, there have been previous years. And Dave, could you start talking us through how Veeam has moved and perhaps what's changed in how Forrester's method is applied to the different companies that they evaluate?
Yeah, absolutely. So you look on the left-hand side, and that was the just prior version of the wave. While Gartner seeks to update their Magic Quadrant every year, annually that is, Forrester does an every other year delivery. So on the left-hand side, that's 2022. On the right-hand side, that's the most recent 2024. If you just look even color coding, the first thing that jumps out at you is that gray notion that was there seems to be gone. If we look on the left compared to the right, what happened is Forrester moved from 4 different areas or bands that a vendor could be placed into down to 3. And so that's why you see sort of 3 different shadings of blue going from lighter to darker as you go to the upper right. The other 2 aspects that changed on this were, it used to be the size of the bubble associated with a vendor denoted the notion of market presence, and that was typically heavily influenced by things like market share and ability to move market. That has been supplanted, so all of the bubbles, if you will, for the vendors on the right-hand side this year are of equal stature. That was replaced by the other big change, and Jason alluded to it. If you kind of look just on the right-hand side above the leaders version or notion of the legend there, you'll see customer feedback. And what was done this year was the notion of being able to call out based upon customer reference calls who actually scored the highest from a vendor delivery perspective in terms of the peer group feedback of administrators, data center professionals. Veeam was the only one that got that customer feedback award, if you will, or designation. So we're very proud of the fact that not only did we move dramatically, meaning over to the right on strength of strategy, we also made major gains in terms of the new evaluation process, customer feedback. The last thing I'll point out, and maybe toss it over to you, Jason, if you just start to look at the vendor names beyond Veeam, even, Veeam, while we moved up and we moved over and we moved into that darker bubble, which got resized, you'll see some of the other vendor names that had some dramatic movement. Now, again, this is over a 2-year period, but still, Jason, dramatic movement. Pick any vendor you want and then take a look at, well, one of them's no longer there, meaning Zerto, but any other one you want to pick probably move significantly.
Yeah, I think the thing that was interesting to me when I saw the shift, and I had forgotten this was a 2 year measure versus one. First of all, I want to give Forrester props. You and I both come from the analyst world, and frankly, there's a lot of analysts out there that spend most of their time just in spreadsheets. And the fact that they're actually gathering customer feedback and wanting to really understand what is actually landing well and not just what is pitched well from analysts and marketing, I give Forrester props for really listening to the customer feedback from that. But I do think it's interesting that when you look in the leaders, can't say quadrant, when you look in the leaders hemisphere, the circle, the wave, you do see that established, not just do we protect the propensity of what an enterprise relies on, but these are trusted names that folks have seen a while in our industry that we've been tracking for a very long time, right? Now, in that second wave out, that's to me is the most interesting shift is some of the, I guess you call them unicorns, right? So some of the newer players that 2 years ago were enjoying a, pun intended, halo effect, actually have naturally now not in the leader wave. They are in that next wave out. And I think those shifts out where enterprises are starting to say, hey, great ideas, how you doing on execution, right? And embracing that. I think that's kind of interesting when you look at, I know we're not allowed to create dots for where they started and came and look where they all slid left. But to me, that was the most interesting shift over the 2 year span.
Yeah, and for sake of simplicity visually, Jeff, we didn't show 3 waves, meaning if we go back even 2 prior. If we could have, though, what you would have seen is the unicorns that Jason referenced were practically in the cusp of sliding off the right-hand side in the leader bubble in 2020. So that's Rubrik and Cohesive. You don't have to, it's not rocket science to figure out who those are, so I can feel comfortable mentioning them. They were much, much further to the right. 2022 came back a bit. 2024 came back a dramatic amount. The other one, and I want to actually give, positives as well. But if you look at IBM, they moved significantly over to the left just in those 2 ways we're demonstrating or they're putting up here visually. But look at Veritas. Hats off to Veritas, who dramatically moved over to the right. Obviously, Veritas just closed in their deal with Cohesity to be acquired. I just got to pause on that, Jason, to mention it's a pretty unique day when really number 4 in market gets acquired by number 7 in market. You don't see that in a mature landscape like this often.
No, you don't. And the fact that news was actually breaking during a major conference actually made for a lot of really interesting fodder on the finalization day. But it is interesting that I guess by the next time this wave comes around, it's the Cohesity plus Veritas lens. But it's interesting that if you look at the last 3 iterations of the Forrester wave, only one of them has been a leader in each one, and it's been a different one for the last 3 consecutive waves. So it'll be interesting to see what does that look like when it all kind of comes together. So we live in interesting times.
Well, and to both of your points about actual execution, I think that we've all been following various announcements about what is going to happen with the merged product lines from the new Veritas plus Cohesity. And there have been, to put it mildly, some changes in the narrative coming out about what that's going to look like for customers. So it'll be very interesting to see in terms of execution what life is like for longtime Veritas customers come a year from now.
Oh, Dave, do you remember when we were both analysts when Veritas bought Backup Exec? I mean, they were siblings in the same org for a decade and never put the code together. I mean, those 2 were separate silos to separate segments forever. The merger was semantic. They never, I mean, the idea of security and backup together was probably about 15 years too early. But they never combined go-to-markets. You had separate account managers all the way through from acquisition through divestiture a decade later. So yeah, it'll be an interesting time, but that's actually not on the agenda for today. So we'll have to pound on that one more in 25 as we see how the dust settles.
So, gents, let's change gears a little bit because this is very interesting. And Jason, what I'd like to do is jump to the part of the talk where we're planning on hearing from you, because you were speaking of Gartner, we've all been almost slipping into talking about Magic Quadrants for the past couple of minutes. You were at the Gartner IOCS conference last week in Las Vegas. Obviously, this is the Gartner Magic Quadrant. We're not going to stay on this for long, but Jason, I wanted to find out what's the overall focus of the Gartner IOCS conference that you attended last week?
Yeah, for the folks who've been listening, and every time I keep slipping and using the cue as that, it's not because the Forrester wave is any less significant. It's just I have been drinking Gartner Kool-Aid for the last 6 days while I was out in Las Vegas. But as a reminder, so this is, to pivot the conversation, this is a different analyst firm looking at the same landscape of vendors there. In this case, for Veeam, we are in that upper right leaders quadrant. Now I can actually say that word. We're on the right diagram. We are just like you saw on the last diagram, Veeam was recognized as highest in strategy. In this lens, Veeam was recognized as highest in ability to execute. And Dave, I don't think that that's a disconnected set of concepts between when you talk about strategy, not just strategy of product, but strategy of go-to-market and customer enablement. We talked about how important the partner ecosystem is. I think that manifests here as best to execute because we're there with the customer along the way. 3 out of 4, the Global 2000, number 1 in market share, over 500,000 customers that rely on Veeam. I think highest to execute and highest to strategy from the last diagram, I think those line up.
Yeah, I like the consistency in that regard. You're right, and I think it's the same for the reasons that you mentioned. What I think is fascinating is you could assert that the x-axes are the same in concept from both Gartner and Forrester, but very, very different results were derived. And I think that's fascinating, taking in the same calendar year, the same product sets from in this case, the exact same analysts or analyst evaluated vendors. So those now that we're seeing in this quadrant, and now that we can say the keyword in the leaders quadrant, for example, every single one of those also was in the wave, but they're in very different positions. Just Veeam itself, from a x-axis perspective, Gartner terminology vision, Forrester terminology strategy, actually got evaluated differently. I like that, and it's further proof in my mind that, Jeff, everyone should do their own evaluation. What I mean by that is absolutely use these methodologies as a starting point. It's no different than if you were to go out in your personal life. Jason wants to get a new pickup truck. Maybe he looks at Consumer Reports. That's a starting point, right? From that point on, you're going to personalize that, apply the criteria that you think is most important to you. Jeff may come up with a different evaluation than Jason does, even in that same context. So it's just proof that you need to use these as solutions that can help, not solutions that completely answer.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things I was always intrigued by, if you're a nerd looking at things like GPS, the way that GPS works is if you can correlate 3 independent points, you know exactly where you are. And I'm gonna take a leap here. Maybe this is gonna be a blog for me to start off 2025. But if you look at Gartner says highest to execute, Forrester says best in strategy, IDC says largest in market share, right? You now have 3 very discrete data points from 3 very different points of view. And from that, you can tell exactly where Veeam is in the data protection landscape. Tell me, does that hold water?
That sounds great.
That's a nice one.
Love
I like
it.
that analogy.
All right, so that's going to be my
Love
blog.
it.
But hey, so let's talk about what really happened at the Gartner conference besides Veeam having one of the largest booths on the floor and telling everybody exactly where we sit within the MQ. So a couple things that kind of came out that I thought were really interesting. Certainly in 2024, leaning into 2025, you could not have an IT conversation without talking about resilience. I got to give props. Michael Hoke, one of the authors for the MQ, actually did a session on how does the Magic Quadrant get built. And Dave, I got to tell you, I learned, I mean, we've been in the MQ for years. There are things I didn't know about, hey, and here's the 6 vectors of what we really looked at this year, and this is what we were trying to measure. It's like, damn, could we have seen that during the application process? But it really was very insightful as far as how that goes. And then every one of those MQ authors had at least one, more than one, session on cyber resilience and cloud data. Got to be protected. Not as easy as you think. What does that look like for cyber storage? And then what are the nuances for IaaS and PaaS? Fantastic session comparing cloud-based workloads to barbecue grills. Totally going to steal half those diagrams. But resilience wasn't the only thing that really was top of mind for folks. Almost every time slot during the day had something about hypervisors, hybrid cloud, VMware choice, vSphere alternatives, those kind of things. There was a great line one of the analysts had around, if you're going to be switching architectures in 2025, there will be a VMware-shaped hole in your infrastructure and strategy that nothing else will fill. And it's like, I mean, that was a mic drop moment on, there is not an equitable way to do that along the way. So there's a lot of different diagrams out there, which candidly validated. Veeam also had a session, and our session was called "The Greatest 2 Threats in 2025 Are Ransomware and Licensing Changes." And so we had no way to plan for that, but both of those topics were shared by many of the Gartner analysts themselves. And so, Jeff, if we can kind of go one more slide in, we gave some takeaways on both ransomware and certainly our series here on Industry Insights has covered that in quite a bit of detail. But we also talked about some of the shifts in Broadcom. And here's the takeaways that I shared for the 300 nice folks that came to my session last week. So we no longer live in a single hypervisor ecosystem, right? So yes, people are moving off of vSphere, and no, there is not a single destination they are all going to, which means unlike the last 30 years that all three of us have been in the data protection space, where there was one gold standard for what IT should look like, that is not true moving forward, right? So it's going to be multi-hypervisor and multi-cloud. That is not a transitional state. That is the new diversified norm, which means that you're not looking for a data protection resiliency solution that is best for Veeam for vSphere, Commvault for Windows, ArcServe for NetWare, TSM for mid-range. You're not looking for a single solution best in class. What you're looking for is comprehensive protection and equitable capabilities across multi-hypervisor, multi-cloud environments. And we've never seen that in the industry before, but that is the new norm. So take that away. And then we looked at what were the gaps, and one of the biggest hesitations that most CIOs have is that their management tools, including data resiliency, are not equitable as they move from vSphere to the other hypervisors. They're going to fill that void, and so thankfully we have something to say both around the data security conversation and the data portability conversation as well. The mic drop that I left folks with is just a friendly reminder that a migration is a disaster that you can schedule, right? Same transformation, same portability requirements. It just doesn't happen on Monday at 7 a.m. So, or Sunday afternoon. So, Jeff, let's go ahead and just go one last slide, just because, just in case you haven't seen either of those sets of data along the way, we did provide these for all the kids that attended the IOCS conference as well. I don't know, Dave. Yeah. So, I did a lot of pontificating on 2025 and the landscape. Anything that you felt, I mean, as a Gartner alum, I'm sure you heard the vibes coming from Vegas, but anything that reverbed from your side?
Well, I think you really correctly submitted a presentation months prior to the actual event, which hit the real key points, meaning, licensing changes and cyber threats continuing. those licensing changes as well as cyber threats. I'll give a somewhat of a plug out for Veeam, meaning one of our 5 key pillars of data resiliency is around data portability and the freedom that that affords you. Maybe it's because of a cyber event, but maybe it's because of a migration across hypervisors or across clouds. So have to give just a little commercial there that these things like licensing sounds like it doesn't affect product, but product has a role to play, meaning if a Broadcom or any other change happens, could hypothetically be a hyperscaler cloud provider, it may necessitate data movement of which you previously didn't plan. To your point about migration, it wasn't planned until it was, but at least you do have a notion of being able to see it coming.
Yeah, we talked a lot about 5 years ago, we talked about, look, when you modernize and go from the data center to, say, Office 365 is the example, a lot of organizations actually modernized their way from well-protected to underprotected as they went to SaaS-based platforms. And I think that admittedly now in the data center, we're going to see that same shift where folks are realizing that as they modernize from single hypervisor to multi-hypervisor, multi-cloud, again, they're going to go from well protected on their flagship hypervisor to underprotected in this heterogeneous world. And I think that's going to make for some really interesting shifts and probably some resume generating events in 2025.
Well, gentlemen, I don't think that I could have asked either of you for a better summary of what we learned from the wave and what we learned from Gartner IOCS last week. Thank you both for being on our last Industry Insights of the year. It's always a pleasure talking with y'all. For our regular viewers, I will just mention that we will be back with Tech Bites on Thursday as usual. This week, we're going to have Kirsten Stoner and Matt Crape from Veeam talking about discovering actionable insights with Veeam Intelligence. There have been a lot of innovations in the use of AI and machine learning in Veeam lately. And if you tune in on Thursday, you'll get to see those hands-on from Kirsten and Matt. So please join us for a great show at noon Eastern Time on Thursday. Dave and Jason, thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.